Hey everybody, I hope you're all well. Forgive that Shaw. I kind of ran out of gas halfway through it. But today I wanted to talk about low riding. And before I get started, I hope you're all, doing well. You're feeling blessed and happy. I wanted to talk about low riding a little bit and my experience with it. Um, when I was a little kid, maybe around 9, 10 years old. A person I call my mentor sometimes, Manuel. He had a Grand Prix and he bought some True Classics for it, and he bought some hydros that he put on the back. And so the ass was switched, not the front, just the ass, and it had True Classics. And at the time, we used to go to church on Sundays at Our Lady of Guadalupe, and the parents would go to the church and the kids would go to like this catecismo Sunday school thing. And it was just like a daycare, really. And the nuns always had us draw pictures of Jesus. And, I always drew him driving a lowrider. And a lot of the other kids also drew Jesus driving in a lowrider. Um, and one day I drew the lowrider. It had True Classics and it didn't have Kragers anymore. And the other kids were like, "Hey, what kind of wheels are you drawing?" And some of them were kind of mad that I wasn't drawing Kragers. Like, those ain't real. You got to draw them like this. So even at an early age, people are trying to put their thumb on you and make you conform to how they see the world. But I drew True Classics, and it became a fight. And eventually I got thrown out of Sunday school because I became fascinated with drawing my hand, and I would draw it middle fingers all the time. Like, I would draw my hand doing a middle finger. One day I drew Jesus doing a middle finger, driving a lowrider. And so I was ahead of my time because everybody does the middle finger now. So there was that Grand Prix. And then one of my uncles had a glass house. He didn't have rims on it, but he put beat, and he was always playing "You Dropped a Bomb on Me" by the Gap Band. I love that song. His friend, who now has a drop top 61 that is kind of one of the showstoppers on the cruise strip, he had a green Cadillac. And then my other uncle had like a 54 bomb. And so they would go to this place, Miller Park at the time. And I'll come back to that because in the 80s, the city had a push against cruising, and they kind of gave Miller Park to the lowriding community as a safe place for them to go cruise. And then shortly thereafter, they put in a marina, which kind of gutted the park and made it less favorable to cruising. But they would take me out there sometimes, and I would see the cars out there. I would see people shining them. People would hop against each other and line them up, out on the cruise strip. And these were like showpieces. This is the 80s. This is mid to early 80s. And here in a Facebook group, some folks would talk about Cadillac Jack, who everybody knew his car. Even if you didn't know him personally, you knew who he was by his car. And so that was kind of my experience initially around lowriders, was them taking me to the park, in either this Grand Prix with hydraulics or my uncles with beat, and what have you. Then my grandfather moved out of the projects to this to a place, Meadowview, and it was near. It was on Detroit Boulevard, and there was a guy there. I won't say his name because I don't mention names, but it's not even anything bad. But he had this like tangerine Monte Carlo, and it had front, back, side to side, a scrape plate. And I thought it was just the most beautiful car ever. And he also introduced me to pit bulls. Like, I was blown away that these just tough little dogs were so ferocious. genetically, like from puppyhood, he would grab them by the collar and they were like, "Ah," trying to get him. And I was like, oh, damn, this is something different. Um, and so, he was from that neighborhood out there, and he would drive up and down the street scraping. And so I was always fascinated, and I always had a love for lowriders. Um, at the same time, we were immigrants in the late 70s, so I had this fascination with Chicano culture. Um, and I like the way they walked with pride, the pride they took in their cars. And I also saw it as I always saw Chicano culture back then, and I didn't come around to it later as activist culture. I always saw Chicano culture as activism and fighting for equality and equity and things of that nature. And then just the beauty of it was the cars and the other parts of the culture. I remember in the early '80s when Zoot Suit, I don't know if it had just come out. I think it had, but we would have these things, kermeses and events at for Cinco de Mayo or Independence Day, and like all the school photos were Zoot Suit. Um, the pencils were Zoot Suit. There was a lot of memorabilia associated with the movie, and everybody wanted it. And this was a time when girls wore China flats. Guys had a paño on with a baseball cap over it, flipped up with their hood written on it. Some wore suspenders under their Pendletons. It, it, uh, it 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 was very unique, and they walked proud, and I like that. So, anyways, um, so I always had this fascination with Chicano culture and lowriders as well. And I have heard and from movies I've seen that initially there was lowrider culture and there was gang culture. And then after Colors and movies in the '90s kind of seemed to, like, Hollywood seemed to merge the two. But even in Boulevard Nights, if you remember, the older brothers, they were trying to be cool and into the cars, and it was the younger ones that were kind of, bringing heat to the boulevard. Um, and in that vein, the '90s saw a big crackdown on low riding. There was a lot of violence involved with it. A lot of gang stuff was peaking at that time. Folks would get into fights out on the boulevard, and the loser would probably get their car fucked up. No lie, their windows would get busted out, lights, doors kicked, and fortunately back then, Impalas were, $3,500. Homie could save and get one. Now, I do see a gentrification of the culture. If a culture can be gentrified, we usually hear about that term with regards to neighborhoods. But I have seen people who maybe didn't grow up with a love for lowriders, see the cruising, see the cars three wheeling, and they want one. It's just another toy to them. Not saying it's everybody or even that it's wrong. I have hobbies. I've taken up fishing, and that's not part of my roots, and I sucked at it, and I don't fish anymore. But I do see a gentrification of the culture, and some of that is reflected in what Impalas go for now. A convertible from '64 on back is easily 80 to 200,000. A hard top 58 through 63 is probably a good 50 to 80,000. And so it's not the blue collar car anymore that we could afford as Raza generally. And that's why we had those cars, because we couldn't afford the Corvettes and the Porsches and the Ferraris. And so we took what was affordable to us, which were these mass produced cars, and we made them beautiful with what we had. And that's that's really a beautiful thing. And as a comparison, sometimes you see folks with these bikes and they got lights on them and reflective tape, and they've decorated them all out, and they look pretty interesting. And where I first saw those was like in the poorest neighborhoods with the folks who had the least, and so they were trying to shine with what little they had. And I think that's some of what is behind low riding is, not having money to like what was already pretty off the line, and then we made them pretty, and over time, people began to see the potential and beauty that we saw. And so, fast forward to now, I've recently seen, lowrider clubs come together and push for political changes around anti-cruising laws, around the closing of parks and public streets to us because we look a certain way, or there's a stigma attached to the car culture that maybe had a little bit of relevance in the 90s, or more relevance, but today is not really applicable. I belong to a car club, and you know I I eventually left it because when we had our first meeting, when I left, I took off burning rubber, and I was told, hey, you can't be burning rubber. It reflects badly on the culture, and I appreciate that now. But back then, I had just gotten this a convertible 1970 Impala. I had some gold ones on it, and it was my first lowrider, so to speak, and I was acting like it was, like I've never had anything before, and I never had, and now I did. So, I was like burning rubber at every corner when I left, and blaring the music, and at first, even if it was hella hot, I had the top down. I've learned now, convertibles are for spring and fall days in the evenings and mornings. It's not for hot summer days. But I ended up wrecking that car. And when I bought it, when I wrecked it, I was able to get twice as much as what I paid for it because they had just really appreciated. And I took that and then, borrowed some to get an Impala that was older, much older and much rarer than a 70. And it's a nice car. It's halfway taken apart because the folks that kind of taught me about low riding in the late 80s to early 90s, they kind of frowned upon a thing called TV dinners. And a TV dinner means someone made it for you already. You didn't have to cook it. It wasn't your paint job. It's not your car. You're driving someone else's build. And so I wanted to make it mine. That was part of what I was taught. And then another thing that I kind of learned was going back to the car club. When I was in that car club, I saw how every car club would host an event and all the other car clubs would support them. And so our event was, we had a caso, and we cooked up carnitas and food at the park, and we invited all the other car clubs, and then people would just stop by, grab food, talk about the cars a little bit, and then they'd go back to their little spot at the park, and other folks would come by, and we would share food. And and it was either car shows, we would go support their car shows so that they were successful, and vice versa, car washes, just everybody supported everybody. And this has been going on for this is probably 5-6 years ago, and today there's I see more unity than ever. the neighborhood drama that used to exist in the 80s and 90s. I haven't seen it. I mean, if it's there, I'm just not around it. Um, I just see a lot of unity. And when, when I recently saw how the car clubs came together to advocate against, these new cruising laws and what is seems like oppressive and racist led policies against us, they got a lot of attention. And I think folks recognize that a united lowrider community is incredibly powerful. I mean, they can shape the electorate, and and I think they know that, and it was really beautiful to see them embrace that. And the other thing is, since they're advocating for a repeal of some of these anti-cruising and targeted actions, they've had several cruises. And one of the things that came up is some folks were kind of upset about some of the littering that was left after the cruise. But what I saw was, a car club that formed a team, a cleanup team, and then other folks that came out with bags and were picking up not only after themselves but after others. And the truth be told, collectively, the lowrider community, despite some folks that littered, collectively they left it cleaner than they found it. And folks come to look at the cars. They're beautiful. They're a draw. So there's that today, and I think that's a really beautiful thing, and I think it's progress for the community. They've been here before, but I think they're stronger than ever now, given some of the political rhetoric around equity and equitable distribution of resources. I hope that here locally, that the park does remain a place for lowriders, and that eventually maybe handball courts and murals go up, or basketball courts, or other things that celebrate the culture itself, like maybe in Chicano Park. And then, I think to close out, before I make this too long, I did notice, like, and this was in the past, so I've hung around, and and a lot of these folks are still my friends, like two different types of lowriders. There was the lowriders who, they were down dudes, but when they saw another lowrider, they got happy, and they wanted to check out the car and make a friend, and again, these are down dudes. That was just their approach to it. Then I had other friends who, if they saw a lowrider, it was a threat. And if that lowrider hit switches on them, they were fucking pissed. And they would hit switches back. And I remember one time, we were in Woodland. And Woodland used to crack with the cruises. And, we come through the intersection, and we're in this blue Cadillac, and we're just hopping. Wow. We're just like, you just through the intersection. And I was with a dude who, I'm sure people, he was well known in the streets, and I think in prison as well. And as we're hopping through the intersection, this car comes up like it's going to T-bone us, and it turns to align with us. And when he turns to align with us to, run parallel, he goes up on three wheels. And we only had front and back. So the most we're going to do is hop. And he's on three wheels next to us, and then he drops to the thing, and then he drops to side to side, and he's scraping on the side that's closest to us. And the sparks ain't getting on us, but he's clowning with his lowrider shit. Like, I thought while we're in the car, oh, fuck, we got hella clowned. And the guy I'm with, he got hella mad and started yelling at him, "Why don't you fucking paint it?" I said, "Why don't you paint that car?" Because it was primered. And the dudes in that car were hogs. I mean, they pulled over, we pulled over, and it ended up working out and folks chatting and being about the cars. I think they knew each other actually after, it like after they parked and kind of got close. And so I was glad for that because, I was kind of out of my league there. But there's that aspect of it too where if you hit the switches on someone, you're challenging them. If you pull up next to them and they got music and you crank yours up and it knocks on theirs, you're challenging them, and people get mad, and some people take that shit pretty serious. And I haven't seen that as much anymore, but that was a part of it, and there was a part of it where, lowriders were seen as gangster cars, and if you drive a lowrider down someone's street, you're making gangster moves on their street, and they didn't like that. But again, that was kind of a low riding I saw in the past, and more with people who were just hyper aggressive all the time towards people, and so there was that. But today, what I see is, lowriders providing a service of unity. Because everyone's getting together regularly, they're meeting, they're working together for collective goals, as so far as like local politics, and that they feed the homeless, they do toy drives, you know, pretty much any reason to cruise. But they do a lot of good with it today, and I really like that. And and I do gotta confess that somewhere along the way, I think I lost my way because my Impala, I feel like it would be wrong to cut it out for hydraulics. But that was my dream, to have an Impala with hydraulics, not to have an Impala, but to have a lowrider. And so I'm struggling with that now. Do I cut it out? Or do I just make it super fast and it's still a 61 and it's still laid, but it's just a resto mod. So, and I mean, it would still be a lowrider kind of technically, but, maybe we'll see. But that's my story of low riding. I think it's a super positive thing now. I think it's always been a positive thing because it was an outlet for people. I think in the 90s, gang culture was attached to car culture, and they're really two different things with some overlap. But right now at the Ford Museum in Sacramento, they have, it might have just ended, but they did a running on the art of low riding, and it's getting the props it deserves. You saw the lowriders in the Super Bowl halftime show. So, much love to the lowrider community. Keep up the good work. Keep shining, and making us proud to see our people coming down the street looking so beautiful and pretty in their beautiful cars. Much love.